Hi, I'm John Grooters. If you could draw, really draw, how dangerous would you be? Draw your friends in compromising situations, draw your boss looking like an idiot. You see, it takes someone more mature than you or I to handle this near superpower. Someone like Todd Shaffer, today on No Shame.
Have no shame, no, we are not afraid, no shame, of the gospel of his name. It's the power of God, by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid, no shame.
So, welcome to the No Shame Podcast, and this is the Turnabout is Fair Play edition of the No Shame Podcast, and my guest is Todd Shaffer. Welcome, Todd, to the podcast No Shame.
Thanks for having me, John.
He had to say yes. This is one guy he had to say yes because I was on his podcast a few weeks ago, Conversations with Creatives, and I think I was probably incredibly boring, but at least it got me an interview with you on ours, so thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me. You weren't boring at all.
Well, this is a guy, podcast listeners and Zoom watchers, that truthfully, I've got a chance to get to know you better since our conversation. I've looked at a little more of your work, and this guy is multi-talented. The word multi, I would put in all caps. You do all kinds of things, and when you do a lot of things, the sort of underlying assumption is that you're not very good at any of them.
Yeah, pretty much.
So if you put your name on too many credits, it just feels like either you didn't have any budget for the movie or you didn't know. But the other side of that coin, Todd, is you can't limit yourself to saying, well, I'm an animator,
right,
or I'm a screenwriter, or I'm a director, or in your case, the list kind of keeps going for a while because you're a painter. You don't want to stop that list too soon. Why not?
I enjoy all forms of art. My first love has always been film and art in the second place, but I've pursued both of those all my career. And when you're in the arts, you never know which one's going to stick, where you're going to find gainful employment. So especially in animation, it helps to have more than one ability to find work in. So animation is an interesting one because it's a very specialized field if you're good at it, right? Yeah.
So I've heard you say it matters who you learn from. Who taught you? How did you learn how to become an animator? What's the story?
That's a good question. A lot of animators and artists will say that they're self-taught, but in reality, nobody's really self-taught if they make anything of themselves. You always have people who have influenced your life and taught you either through books or videos or one-on-one. But I went to film school, and from film school, I built my own animation program there because that's what I was sort of leaning towards. Because you go to film school, they say if you want to be a director, you have to find something else to do until you get that opportunity. So I just thought animation was one of those things, and it worked out for me. The Lord was gracious in my pursuit because from film school, I went straight out to Los Angeles, had a job within 2 weeks, and I've been in animation ever since. And in some cases, I've been trying to get out of animation, but it's one of those things where you get pigeonholed into something, and it's hard to move. But I've got a lot of influences from painters. I've studied oil painting. I've studied drawing in Los Angeles at Pasadena Art Center from lots of really great guys. I've studied filmmaking on my own a lot and reading a lot of books. And for me, it's been a lot of observing and doing.
I liked your sentence. I heard you say what you just mentioned, that a lot of us fall back and, well, I'm self-taught. Yeah. And you said that really means you're untaught. Yeah. And it doesn't mean you don't have talent, but if you're self-taught, you don't, this is your sentence, not mine, you don't know what you're missing.
Yeah.
Say a little more about that, the importance of instruction.
Well, you always want to learn. You want to expand what you know. You don't want to just limit yourself to your own bubble because you have your own blind spots and areas where you need somebody to come in and say, hey, you're doing it wrong here. If you just did it this way, you would. So you need that expansive effort. And one of the things I find, at least in painters and artists, is that they focus on one thing and they don't look elsewhere to learn from the whole plethora of the arts, because the arts are cross-pollinate. You can learn from music. All artists can learn from music, from one another, from watercolorists. Oil painters can study watercolor because they hate watercolor usually. But you have to pull all these things together, just like filmmakers can learn from documentarian filmmakers as well. So you have to pull from everything in the arts.
I think this isn't just a message for students or for our kids. I mean, it is a message that says, hey, it's going to be important who your instructors are, but it's really a lifelong thing, right? Like we do have the internet. We need to know how to sort between, the wheat and the chaff, though, when it comes to books or internet instruction. How do you do that?
Well, you have to time yourself. I mean, the kids today have great advantages over what we had when we were growing up, right? Because I was making films with a Super 8 camera when I was little, and it cost me $25 to buy film and get it processed. And so you're very limited in what you could do, and you didn't have the resources. You go to the bookstore and you get Northlight books or whatever, and they're very limited in what they would give you. But today you get all kinds of stuff, all kinds of influences. And the kids coming out of schools, at least in the animation programs that we hire from, some of them are just phenomenal just because they've had a wide input of not only being instructed, but seeing what other people are doing and trying to copy that, because we learn from copying. And that emulation aspect of learning is so important, and it really is very powerful. So the one thing I always tell the filmmakers and artists and animators that I work with is that you have to do it. You have to get out and do it as well. You're getting all this influence, but there is something about actually creating the film, making the painting, doing the animation that you learn that you will not get if you're just reading books and watching videos.
When it comes to animation, maybe a little bit of a historical overview from you would be fun. I mean, hand-drawn in the early days. I've seen your studio is doing new releases of classic Bugs Bunny cartoons. So take us from Bugs Bunny in the 50s to Bugs Bunny today. How does the process work anymore, and what's changed?
Well, we used to do it all by hand. So we would draw on paper, on desks, with animation discs. If you look it up, you'll see what it's all about. There still is a charm to doing that, and there are advantages to doing that kind of animation. But today we do everything digitally. I mean, I grew up in a day where 4:00 at night, you bring in all the animation cells or the drawings, and you're shooting them under a camera for the next 2 hours, and then you got to run to the lab, and then the next morning you're getting up first thing, going to the lab, bringing it in, putting it on the Moviola, and editing it all in that. Today it's instantaneous. It's all in the computer, on Cintiqs and digital software, and there's all kinds of things you can do. And there are some studios in Korea that still do pencil and paper. There's some old-time Disney animators who we work with who still prefer to use it in paper, and they scan it into the system and everything. But for the most part, everyone's turning to digital, and it makes things faster and quicker, and you get immediate feedback, basically, when you're working. So you don't have to go shoot it and wait until the next morning to see what you've done,
When you're working on, I was just looking at some of the stuff that you've been doing, or TONIC. Are you still working with TONIC DNA?
Yes.
Is that okay, so that's the name of the company. You're the animation director, or what's your job?
Well, I'm an animation supervisor. I worked with them since 2001. And then I went off for a few years to do a couple of my features, and then I've come back when they've started doing service work. They used to be Pascal Blais Studio. And then they rebranded after Pascal left, and so that's when they started getting all of the big dollar clients in LA, and I came in to help them manage that. So we've been there for 3.5 years, working with a lot of these bigger studios like Warner Brothers and Netflix and 20th Century Fox and those guys. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been a big growing process for the company, but it's been really fun to be there and do these projects. But I'm the animation supervisor for traditional mainly, and we just hired a supervisor for 2D puppets. So that's something of what you are referring to with the Looney Tunes. A lot of the Looney Tunes are done in 2D puppet, which means
wait a minute, puppets? Someone's got their hand inside that thing?
No, it's a 2D puppet. So they build something in digital that you can manipulate like a marionette, basically. in digital software. So that's a whole nother thing. It's usually done for series, but right now we're seeing the showrunners in LA start to turn away from puppet because they like the traditional hand-drawn. It's an interesting thing because when I left Los Angeles back in the late 90s, 2D animation was starting to take a nosedive because 3D was coming out, Toy Story and all these productions were coming out doing 3D animation, and then Disney closes their 2D animation shop. And so we entered this sort of famine wilderness time for 2D animators for at least a decade or more. But now it's starting to come back, and we have been one of the few studios that have maintained 2D animation skills and developed those in the artists. And so now we're getting lots of studios looking for our help.
Well, maybe it's just because I grew up on that stuff. I mean, or I don't know what it is, but I'm in that camp. In fact, I want to work with you. I sent you, even since I talked to you last time, a little project. But you would be the master. But I don't know why. A cartoon, to me, should look like a cartoon. Yeah. And I love the way Bugs Bunny looked, and I love the way Wile E. Coyote looked, and I love the way Daffy Duck. There's something about them. Their motion, it just felt more energetic or eclectic, and it didn't feel like a computer had calculated the way they moved. It's hard to get away from that somewhat animatronic feel, isn't it, in the 3D models? Right. It's hard to get away from that. How do you handle that?
Because it's an equation that's interpolating either ease ins and ease outs, and everything is exactly perfect. Mm-hmm. You know, when you go and look at somebody's painting and everything is perfectly horizontal or vertical, your eye immediately goes, "Oh, this guy's been using a protractor or a ruler for this to measure these things," and it doesn't look natural. It doesn't have that organic feel. So a lot of the younger animators, this is one thing we have to teach them, they have to defeat the tendency of the algorithm that is making the in-betweens between the drawings. So they have to own every single frame. So that's what we meant. That's our mantra. Own every single frame. Don't let the in-betweener do your animation for you. And it's a constant battle with the animators.
So we're on to something here, this conversation, and I don't know if this is helpful for our listeners on the podcast today, but we're with Todd Shaffer. He's the animation director at TONIC DNA in Montreal, a guy who's been in the business in Hollywood for a long time, and he's a well-rounded artist. So I want to kind of take on sort of these egg-heady art conversations today, but I want to translate that to music, because music today, everything's going through Melodyne, everything's going through Auto-Tune, everything's going through, it feels like plastic music to me.
Yeah.
So again, this might be my age, but when I look back and I listen to the records that I grew up with, whether it was Chicago or Boston or the Doobie Brothers, these albums, every single note wasn't like right on the dead string center of the pitch, but those guys could really sing. Yeah. And it took real singers and real players to make that music. Is that at all true in the art world? Did it take a higher caliber of artists to make the old thing, or how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to rob the personality. You want to keep the personality in the project, and so the computer takes it out. You know, so back in the old days, even if you had charted some in-betweens, and like these in-betweens were one half of each other, there's still imperfection in the human translation of that, which gives it that sense of organic feel. Whereas the computer's perfect. And it's just the fact that our eye and our ear can pick out those mechanical perfections and just tell us, something really odd about this because it's just so perfect.
I think maybe we're, in my discussion with you about this, I'm thinking about comedy most of all. And obviously animation can be used for 1,000 other things, from, medical procedures to, it's a huge, huge, huge field. But because I'm bringing up things like Peanuts and Bugs Bunny and the comedy of motion and the irony of speed and everything else, I think maybe that's why I just think it's funnier when it's hand-drawn. Is that possible?
Yeah, I think so. Because one of the things we have to do with the artists is sometimes the studios will say, we want to go for that really old look, and they'll give us the era and the date and the animators and directors who were working on that. And so we sort of know what schools they worked from and what they were thinking about. So then we have to tell them, okay, these tools that you're usually using, the way you used to think about animating, a Disney show, that is sort of the standard. these parts you don't do, but these parts you focus on and emphasize. And often we will tell the artist, just don't be so technical. You need to get a first rough pass that is just visceral. It's scribble drawings, and you're just going for movement and motion. And then you start doing the carpentry work of putting that character back on model. So often our very first passive animation is very scribbly. A normal person would look at it and go, I have no idea, it's movement, but it doesn't look like the character. But we know what we're looking at, and we isolate the problem. So the basic problem is performance and movement and getting the business across that is required for the shot or the scene. And then we go back. We know we can draw. I mean, we spend all of our lives drawing, so that's not the issue. Now we got to put the character on model, and that process helps to bring about something that's a little more personality driven, rather than moving a puppet around or a 3D model around, because you sort of break some of the proportions. Sometimes the proportions change. Sometimes they go off model, and the off model part is can often be very exciting and add that extra spice to a performance.
How many frames per second is Bugs Bunny being drawn in?
Well, we have 24 frames a second in film, but in general, for most motions, we put those what we call on twos. So it's effectively 12 frames a second. But then animators, depending upon the action, if it's a fast action, they'll put it on ones. So part of it will go on ones.
Put it on twos, put it on ones there.
Yep.
Pay attention so that when you're talking with your pseudo animator friends, you can throw these kind of phrases around, listeners to the No Shame podcast, and they'll think you're an insider Hollywood, Disney, Warner Brothers animator.
Or a kook.
Okay, one last thing about the revival of the old animation scenes. You can make Tweety Bird look like Tweety Bird. You can make Bugs Bunny look like Bugs Bunny, but there's a one irreplaceable element, isn't there?
What's
the
that?
voice.
The voice. That's right.
Mel
yes.
Blanc.
Yep. They've done a pretty good job, I'd have to say. On some of the characters, they've done a pretty good job. On others, it's a little bit off. But
you would think that with 7 billion people on the planet, you know what I mean? But it turns out no one sings like Sinatra, do they?
That's right.
Even the copyists, they don't sound like Sinatra.
You can't.
The voice, the human voice, is so unique. It's a real fingerprint, and I didn't think I don't think I still realized that until some of our favorite singers, as we get older, start to die. Tom Petty is gone, so other people are pretending to sing like Tom Petty, but they don't sound like Tom Petty.
Yeah.
And nobody is going to sound like Bugs Bunny to our ears if we remember as close as they come. Now it'll hopefully be fine for a new generation who doesn't have that comparative, but. Wow, the voice is an important thing.
Yeah. Well, it's a tool set. We think of it as somebody's voice, but you've got head voice, you've got falsetto, you've got chest voice, you've got the performance and delivery, accent, all kinds of things that go together that make that voice unique, either in delivery or character of the sound. And, some voices change with age. So it's age specific as well. So it's a constantly moving target.
Man, so there's a project you're working on I want to talk about called Prodigal the Musical.
Yes.
You want to set that up for me?
Yeah, well, I made a film when I left TONIC DNA basically to do my own stuff. My producer, who I joined forces with, was taking a visual effects company and turning it into a character animation studio, and he brought me on to lead up that department. And we were doing some feature films that, for whatever reason, the financing fell through after we got into production. And he came into my office one day, and he knew I was a Christian. He said, I want to make a baby Jesus film. And I thought, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding me! A baby? Wait, you're an atheist agnostic, and you're wanting to do a baby Jesus film? So he said, yeah, I think I get some money for that. I'll be back in an hour. Tell me how you approach it. And I thought, oh no. And I started praying, like, Lord, how can I get rid of this thing? And I opened up Luke, and I'm like, okay, Mary and Joseph are passive protagonists. Can't do that. And then there's all this Hebrew poetry. Nobody's going to know what any of this means. And because I'm an expository preacher at my church, and I've been trained in expository preaching, I can't overlook those passages. So the only way I can handle them is make a musical. So I told him that when he came back, and he said, hey, I think I can get more money for that. And so He went back to his office, ran some numbers, came back, said, "Hey, if we get this money, we'll start writing the script next week." So, and I'm not musical really, and so that's how I ended up writing a musical. And it was a short little, direct to video, but it was a package. So we had to do that one, and he said, "Okay, what would be the next one?" I said, "Well, the only thing I could think of off the top of my head would be a musical based on the parable of the prodigal son, because it happens really internally. It's about him and his change and everything. To me, it fits perfect for a musical. So I started doing that. And it started out as a direct-to-video, and then we expanded it into a feature because we just got some really good music. We got Broadway talented actors and a really great composer on this one. And so we were just pushing the envelope, and then at one point we just ran out of money, and we're 80% done and trying to finance the last 20% to get it out. So,
man, God's timing. I should have met you, 12 years ago. I've done all this archaeological work on the birth site, the Migdal Eder, the burial place of Rachel. I got a million. And then I've been watching some of the trailers and stuff for the Prodigal. I've shot in Karnak. I've shot in Medinat Habu. I've shot at the Ramesseum. Shot at the pyramids. I've done work and I'm looking at your animations. I'm like, these are great. I mean, your Egyptian depictions and are so accurate and yet also colorful and vibrant. Like, so I just got to say, wow, someone's research is off the charts on this stuff. I mean, visually anyway, and I haven't heard the screenplay, but amazing work.
No, we had a good visual. I mean, this is a guy, my production designer I've worked with for years. I love him. He's from Bulgaria and he's brilliant. And, we talk a lot about the same thing. So we have the same sort of language that we talk because I know art very well. So he does too. So that's sort of where it all starts. And I've had a really good team. But I'll tell you, working in independent animation is insane. It's just absolutely insane, especially when it's 3D. It's not like a feature film where you can go shoot some stuff and then edit it and, you can probably cobble something together. In animation, it's just insane.
There's no cobbling, is there? There's no extra footage that's on the cutting room floor.
No.
Every frame is there because you made that frame.
Yeah.
And the water looks realistic, and the motion looks realistic, and the lighting, and the shading, and the costuming, and the directing. Yeah, well, what I'm seeing in this, so you're saying you're like 80% through with Prodigal?
Yeah.
Any, what do you think? How could this be a year, 3 years? What do you think?
Well, if we get financing, I guess we could do it in about 8 to 10 months to get it finished because we just have a little bit of animation to finish because it's motion capture based. One of the things we found was that when you're doing independent animation and then it's of a religious nature, you don't get a lot of animators who want to work on your show. So the talent level tends to drop unless you got big bucks behind you. So we found that it was the one thing I've never really liked motion capture, but the one thing motion capture gave us that the animators weren't able to is just basic physics of weight distribution on the characters and basic performances. So they didn't look like they were floating or stopping weird or whatever. So that was our base. And our idea was that, the animation would go faster with that kind of a base. And in some ways it did. So I think it's a really interesting approach to it. And, we designed the characters and everything around that approach so it wouldn't look so foreign. And, I don't think it's perfect, but I think we're getting closer each time we do another project like that. We're refining it. But I forgot what question I was.
Well, I'm just noticing what I think is very, very creative visually, and also just from what I'm no Egyptologist, but I've filmed in the places where these things happen, and I'm just impressed by the set design and the creation of the color and the painting and the use of the sun. It looks really, really beautiful. It looks like an amazing project. I hope you get your 20%.
Yeah.
Because you got to finish this thing.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. No, it hit at a bad time because we were looking for sales distribution and a sales rep, not a sales rep. We were looking for a sales estimate, and we just couldn't get it because all the catalogs are filled with Chinese and Russian animation now that it's going to go nowhere. So they're glutted. At the time we hit was just a bad time to hit for that. So we had financing in place for another project, but with the way the catalogs were and the sales agents were handling their estimates was bad timing.
Well, it certainly is ambitious. What was your title on this film? I mean, what did you do, you personally?
Writer, director.
And how do you direct an animated? What do you do?
Well, you do a lot of storyboards. So I like to control my camera, so I have an idea of what's going to happen. And because this is motion capture, we would rehearse with the actors or dancers, because since it's musical, there's a little bit of a dance element to it. So we would rehearse all that, and then in this specific case, we would shoot each scene as complete as possible, depending upon how I was going to handle it. So I had an idea going in. But then all that motion capture data would be extracted and put into set in situation in low res environments that would allow me to then play with my camera. So I would put in 50 cameras and move them around and see, do my first pass and then see if I could do something differently. Because in animation, one of the things we always say is your first gut instinct is usually cliche. So you want to get rid of it and then do something different. So I would do my first pass, and then I would go and adjust it just to see if I could do it differently and make it, sell, tell the story as it should.
Now that sounds like a Todd Shaffer parable right there, because I've heard your wife say, Melissa say, she's a photographer, and she says, I never point the camera straight at anybody. I always got to find an interesting angle. You taught me that. Is that what you're talking about?
Pretty much. Huh. Our first instinct is usually the same thing that everybody else does, and it's not very interesting because it's not thoughtful. It's just reactionary. So you have to start developing your eye to think in terms of masses and shapes and placement and where the eye line is. And anyhow, we don't have to get into that.
Oh my goodness, do I love to get into that though, because it takes more work to go past your first instinct, doesn't it? Because your first instinct is actually functional.
It is.
And like that dog will hunt. So it's only the pressing through that and taking more time. And sometimes your second instinct doesn't work, but you're talking about trying to give us something fresh, and that's not easy.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I think you've probably experienced this on the set when you're doing take after take after take. Usually the takes that you end up taking and using are either the first two takes or the last two takes, all those ones in between,
Well, it's such I'm editing a film right now. And yesterday I spent the whole day recutting a scene that I had cut very creatively. And I decided I hated it. And I tore it apart yesterday, and I simplified the edit. Yeah. Tomorrow I may hate that. We'll figure it out at some point, but I don't want to be in the way,
Sometimes creativity is your worst enemy because you get too creative and you end up creating a mess. So you lose that simplicity. That's one thing we always focus on is simplicity and clarity. Even when we're posing out our characters, is this character's pose simple and clear? And if it's not, then there's probably something wrong with it.
Well, absolutely right. We're telling stories, and it's not our job to get in the way of the story with the musical score or with the creative lighting of the scene or with the dramatic performance of the actor or with the placement of the camera or with the fast-paced edit. The story is really all that you want to be communicating, and maybe something emotional as well. And you need to keep our interest, but you also have to not distract me.
That's right.
And finding that. So how big is the soundstage that you're shooting these motion captures on? Because some of these scenes I'm kind of watching, you're far, far away. How big is your room?
Well, it depends. We had a studio space in our studio that was quite small, so it was like a big living room. But those were only for special things. But when we got on the stage, we had a studio that we went to that did it for us. And how big was it? It was pretty big. I mean, you could run across it. And you could get
wall?
up. Yeah. No, they didn't have a psych wall because it's all cameras. There's like 140 cameras that surround the stage.
Oh, you're doing that. You're not doing the buttons all over the person. You're doing 100 cameras?
That's it.
You're doing both.
Yeah. No.
Oh, you're actually creating the characters, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. That's great. I was gonna possibly put you on the spot. So if you have a friend that's funny, you say, hey, it's my friend, he's funny. Hey, make him laugh, say a joke. That's very, very rude to do. I did a podcast this week with Desmond Ikegwanu, who is a Nigerian musician, composer, and he brought and did some music. I knew I was having you on today, Todd. I wonder if on the podcast, live, in front of our live studio audience, you'd be willing to do a drawing for me. And I'll give you something to draw.
Okay. All right.
Got a piece of paper?
Yeah, let me get a pad. Hang on.
Ladies and gentlemen, I did not prepare Todd Shaffer for this little test. He did not know it was coming. Normally, he would charge exorbitant amounts of money to draw on spec for us, but we'll see today how professional animator, creative genius Todd Shaffer handles an unannounced project that he did not know was coming. Oh, he's back. Be quiet.
All right.
All right, so here's my idea, Todd.
All right.
I would like to see, someone asked me today, how close are we to this thing ending, right? We're all in lockdown mode. We're recording this on the 20th of May. It's still coronavirus quarantine for everybody. What do we know? We think maybe that, when's the world going to open up? So I had in my mind a vision that I'd like to see you draw.
Okay.
So here's the idea. The concept is we've sent out the dove from the ark, and he's returning with a roll of toilet paper in his mouth.
All right.
So how would you handle that?
So a shot. So you want a shot?
Yep, a single.
All right. Let's see.
Now, at various times, he'll show us his
I don't know if
page.
you can see something. If there's a frame, I'm doing a frame. I'm just
Make sure
working
you
out.
draw really dark lines.
Yeah, I gotta. Well,
So you can imagine Noah. He's been on the boat for a year. You think we've had it bad, but he's been in quarantine for a year. And his wife, Mzara, is saying, Noah, I'm ready to go shopping again. Let's dock this baby and go back to the land. And he's sort of watching the news every night. And he hears one thing from this person and one thing from this person. And like us, doesn't really know when the world's going to open up again. And I don't know what it's been like in Canada, but for some reason down here, kind of maybe not one of the tragic images, because obviously there's been human tragedy of a massive proportion, but one of the commercial oddities that I don't believe was predicted was that no one's been able to buy toilet paper for 2 months. And now my wife, being who she is, somehow had ordered for our office a massive box earlier. And all right, there it is.
this is just my rough, just sketching ideas right now.
Nice. See, this is how the creative process works. You take a talented artist like Todd and you distract him and you put small talk and maybe you put the radio on in his office or some music that he likes. And before you know it, you've got a musical with songs and motion capture and...
Maybe I can draw for you here.
Oh, this is great. This has never before been done in live podcast television.
So that's my frame. Here's the bird.
Yep.
I'm figuring the bird can't see where it's going. So it's having to circle the arc a few times to figure out.
And to make it doubly hard, could you do it with your left hand?
That's
Amazing.
it.
Amazing.
I don't know. See, this would be my first gut instinct, so it's probably terrible.
I'm all about efficiency, Todd. At this point, time is money. So it might be terrible, but you know what? It comes in under budget, so we like that. You know this. You're a executive.
Yeah, exactly. So anyhow, he's trying to find a way into the arc.
All right. I want to put that up on the podcast page. Send me a scan of that. Look at that, ladies and gentlemen. That's the proof. That is the proof. Thank you for that. That's really fun. I mean, I think we all wish we could draw. I have to draw storyboards, and it's not a discipline that I can do. So my drawings are only of any value usually to myself. Yeah. But that skill of drawing, the fact that you can sketch a picture on the top of your head, that's awesome. Todd, I want to ask about your family a little bit. You have a unique family, and you guys I've heard you say well, just tell me about your family and what Shaffer Creative is.
Well, Well, Shaffer Creative is something I started because all my kids were following in my footsteps creatively in some respects. So I've got painters, animators, and my second oldest is in film. And so I just thought I'd put up a website just so that we could put the family stuff up together just to help build their internet presence. And it worked for a while, but they weren't as active and into helping me with it, so it sort of went on the back burner. And but they're still doing their thing. They're pursuing their studies in art and film. And
yeah, the Partridge Family was actually a fictional family. I don't know if you know that they weren't really related. They didn't really travel around in a bus doing concerts. Those were actors.
Yeah.
But you have 4 kids, right? And tell me about, like, is that log cabin on your website? Is that like your house? Is that what you live in?
No. That's the log cabin. Where's that? Oh, that's one of the places we like to go to for the weekend. But no,
it's really cool looking.
Yeah, it is a great place. Yeah.
Oh, well, I had all this in my mind that, the 6 of you in this log cabin with classical music painting and everyone doing oils and in plein airs and just sort of the whole thing was in my mind. Amazing.
No, it's more chaotic than that.
How are they handling the shutdown? What's it like in Montreal? What's Canada been like for the last 6-8 weeks?
Montreal is the epicenter of Canada right now. So we have the most, apparently we have the most cases in Canada. And so it's very, very restricted, but they're starting to open up things a bit, just like they are in the States. So
how's it been for your life? What's it meant for you?
Working from home has been great for me because I don't have a 2-hour commute every day, which is nice. But it takes me longer. I have longer hours, longer days because just connecting through the security protocols that we have to go through and manage all the work that we're managing is laborious. It takes a lot longer.
So you've been nose to the grindstone this whole time. Nothing's really slowed down. Yeah.
Pretty much. 2 of my kids work with me at the studio. So one's graduated from art school in animation. So she is, working as well. And my 16-year-old has been helping me with editing. So he occasionally gets an opportunity to make some money and do some work. So
you made a quick comment earlier that I just wanted to ask you to follow up on a little bit about if you were doing biblical content, which was the case for you with the Prodigal the Musical and the prior film, that you actually had a harder time landing talented animators. Tell me about that. Why is that?
Because animators want to go on cool projects, so you can give them lesser salary and go on a cooler project, and they'll take it. So often we'll find that we would find that animators would come into our project just for a few months and then they would leave to a better project. So we were just sort of a gap fill for their career. So,
how many animators does it take to put a movie like that together? How many staff does it take?
Anywhere from pretty much 80 to 200. Depending on how fast you want to turn it around. So it's all about speed, man hours. So the more people you bring on, the more man hours you can achieve.
Well, if you were starting your own company, what size of a team would you put together?
Well, if I had the financing for a film, I would try to get about 80 to 100, maybe 120 to do it right. Yeah.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
Well, you again going back to the fact that Todd, you've been a director, you've been an animator, you've been a writer, you've been a painter. You did an amazing sketch for us today. Do you have any sort of, I would say, deep sense of how God has made you and what He has made you for, and any sense of trying to line those two things up?
Yeah, I have been, especially as I get older. I want to use my gifting to bring something new to the faith-based world, I guess, in a sense. Although I wouldn't necessarily say I was trying to tackle the faith-based market, but I think that there's a place for films that are specifically communicating more deeper theological truths about Christ and about the church and the nature of life and that sort of thing. And, that's sort of where I'm heading. And most of the films that I want to do, the stories I want to do, are more live action based, just because of the content, the nature of the story. So I'm sort of treading in two different worlds, both in animation and live action. And so I do that through writing. So I've written a number of scripts that I'm trying to get financed and off the ground that would do that.
Can't you get the government to pay for it up in Canada? That's what I heard.
Oh, we get tax credits. We can leverage tax credits. That's for sure. That helps.
That does help. I would be more than happy to come to Montreal, work on a film with you. If you were to walk into my house and you were to open my door, right to your left is a very large oil painting of the St. Louis fountain in Montreal that I bought in Montreal. I love that town. I love Quebec. I love Canada, actually. It's got a nice flavor of the North that I am somehow drawn to. So I love your part of the world. And I would love to know how to speak French.
Well, I've been here for more than 10 years. I don't know how to speak French.
You don't?
No.
Well, I'm shattered.
Yeah.
What does your wife do? Tell me a little bit about your wife.
She's a stay-at-home mom. That's all she's ever wanted to do, really, except to do photography. So she's doing that on her own. But she's homeschooled our 4 children, and she's been
oh, wow, really? No wonder they're artists.
Yeah.
Yeah. You said you're not a sports family. That's because with 4 people, what sport can you play?
Oh, they did some sports here and there, but no, they're more artists.
Well, what would you like to see happen, I guess, Todd, once things open up again across the province and across the country? Just dream a minute. You've been writing screenplays, and I know that. I think we have some similar drives. I've been writing screenplays, and there are stories and songs that just make an impression, and I just love the opportunity that sometimes we have to harness the power of a team to get that story out. When I look at what you've already done for Prodigal the Musical, I'm like, that is such a powerful tool. Music and animation, and you can take us anywhere in time and history and space. And the same thing what we can do with a good script and good cameras and good actors. Like, what's your top dream? Is there anything you want to just, not to give away any secrets, but is there anything that you feel like talking about that over the next year or so you'd love to do?
I have a few animated features that our company is, sort of trying to find some financing to develop. So I would like to see those. I've been working on those for a long time. And they're really good stories. Some of them are adaptations, but they're fantastic stories that haven't been told yet. But I would like to make, if I could envision the last chapter of my life, it would be making live action films that marry cinematic excellence and storytelling, really good cinematic stories that also have a very strong theological bend to them. So that's where I'm headed, but not doing biblical things or musicals. I just sort of fell into that, but things that take real life and marry them with really good storytelling in cinema. Well,
I love that's where you're moving. I love the experience that you've had. I love how you have been taught and trained in many disciplines, and you're putting that to good use. And I do hope that you get that final bit on the Prodigal. A musical is both extraordinarily risky.
Yes, it is.
Because everyone's got an opinion on music. And if they don't like the music, then that's it. Doesn't matter. Yeah. So on the other hand, it has the ability to soar to incredible heights, because if they do like the music, now that's an evergreen film, and the kids are singing the songs, and nothing outsells Frozen, right? Because it's a musical. So it's an awesome opportunity, and from what little bit of it I've seen and heard, it's got tremendous quality behind it. And
for a musical, for a film, it has to drive the story. That's the one thing I came away with. I was intimidated by writing music, but because it can be a showstopper, and that you don't want to stop the show, right? It'll die. But when I was learning how to do this thing, one of the books that I was reading said it's got to advance the story. And I thought, okay, now I can handle it, because now I can get my head around advancing a story, so I can write music and make sure that there's either a character arc or a story point that is driving the story forward. It just doesn't stop and somebody's singing about something and dancing around for
Well,
that moment.
right. You still can't lose any of the basic tenets of screenwriting, even in the middle of a song. If there's if it's not going anywhere, if it's just exposition, unless it's Elton John maybe singing the song, you're in trouble. But
That's right.
But you do know that. So I just think I was kind of hoping what you were going to say is that your dream was to meet an American guy with a cast of talking sheep who told Bible stories wrongly to their grandkids and kind of made sheep the hero of every story, even though they, were a little bit sheep-nocentric, I guess, like you might say, and that you were just waiting for that opportunity to fall in your lap. But if
Now that you
not,
planted the seed, maybe.
Oh, really? Did I do that? I did do that. I want to get into animation. Todd's trying to kind of. I've got plenty of live action behind me. I'm editing a feature film right now, and I've been at it for a long time. I'm ready to let the animators do the talking and try to just make us all have a lot of fun. So, you're a fantastic colleague, Todd. I'm honored to make your acquaintance, even on these Zoom Skypes. I hope I can maybe come to Montreal sometime and knock on your door.
Yeah, do so.
I'll be to Toronto doing color fairly soon, and at Deluxe. That's not so far from Montreal. I'm halfway there.
No, that's right. 5 hours away.
And how can we find you? We want to follow what you're doing. Where do I look you up?
ToddShaffer.com is where I tend to put up anything that I'm working on in some respect. As you said, you're on my podcast. You can go ShafferCreative.studio to see what my kids are doing. Sometimes I put some of my stuff up, but then the podcast that you're on is actually the Ministry of Motion Pictures, which you can find at ministryofmotionpictures.org.
Great. Ministryofmotionpictures.org. And Shaffer, that's no C, it's Shaffer. Is that right?
That's correct.
Shaffer.com. Thank you very much for taking time today. I know you're working, and I know Montreal is beautiful today, so maybe you're going to go outside. But thanks for talking to us. It's really great. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, John. It's my pleasure.
God bless.
Thanks.
Have no shame, no, we are not afraid, no shame of the gospel of his name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid.
No Shame is a weekly podcast where John Grooters discusses life at the intersection of faith and culture with all kinds of interesting and inspiring guests. Subscribe to the podcast today by going to johngrooters.com, select the podcast tab, and hit subscribe. Don't miss any of these life-giving conversations.